Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And in this particular segment, I'm going to talk about therapy. There are a lot of mental health professionals out there, and they're obviously in the business of helping people overcome problems. But I think one of the things that happens is how we get people into the process to begin with. Oftentimes it's after a crisis. We've had a breakdown in a family somewhere. Something, they usually get into it because something has gone wrong. Now, there are a lot of things that people can read a book and learn how to do, because there are many, many authors out there. There comes a vast variety of subjects. And the subject of mental health and therapy and learning about things, about yourself, your family, relationships, alcoholism, abuse of medicines, just that whole, there is so many things that there are topics that are written about that you can get a lot of general information on. And some of it very detailed, is very valuable. Lots of research out there. It's ongoing. The problem is when you're an intelligent person, you could read that stuff and it could still not have an effect. It may not have an intended outcome. You read something, you think you're learning about it, and then what? I mean, how do you test yourself to know that something is changing? And when you're in these moments, especially if something in the way of a crisis has brought you to a place in life where you definitely need to affect a change, how do you go about doing that? I mean, can you actually read a book, learn enough about the subject, and change yourself? I mean, that's a very important question. It's difficult, just to say the least. Trying to weed through a lot of problems can be a daunting task, especially if you've never really had the practice to do it before. And when you have things that are coming at you, you could have people's opinions that are coming at you. It could be family. It could be people that you value, and you're getting confused with all of the possibilities. And let's just say from the standpoint, everybody means well. How do you sort through all of that? It is incredibly challenging, if not in some cases impossible to sort through it. This is why a therapist, somebody that's trained in understanding human behavior, the dynamics, the family dynamics, whether it's alcohol or abuse or anything, all of these are different topics. But it's important to be within the confines of a person that, number one, that you can trust, someone who's trustworthy, someone that's licensed to do this. And licensed mean they have gone through course hours, they have practiced, and they are licensed by the state that they reside in to practice therapy. Now, this is very specific. Not just anyone can do this sort of thing. That is why we have courses that are outlined in colleges and universities for people to get the credential, the licensure to do this sort of thing. And there are lots of different styles. There are psychologists and there are psychiatrists. Psychiatrists are medical doctors. They are trained and they can dispense medications. Some people need that kind of help. There are licensed clinical social workers. There are marriage and family counselors. So there's a vast variety, and maybe on another show I will take that and I will dissect that for you and help you get a little more, get behind that or get ahead of that understanding so that you can get the push to go the direction you need to go. There are various members of the clergy, that is in your churches, who are also licensed therapists, and that's a great resource because oftentimes if you can relate it to your spiritual growth, then that may be a way in which to not only help you, but it can help your family because you can do it as a group. And there's individual therapy, there's group therapy, such as in family, or in the cases of, if we're talking about something like a little bit beyond the scope of our show, but let's say you're in a group such as Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-Step. They do it more of a group dynamic. But getting back to therapy itself and doesn't work. When you yourself need help, again, what I started out with talking about was people who might go to a bookstore and pick a topic that seems like it might resonate with what they're trying to deal with. And you can get some insight. You might find something that's very, very interesting, and it might resonate with you enough to want to highlight some things and to take note about. It may be something that's interesting of an experience that you saw it happen to somebody else. It may happen to you. But this is when the wheels begin to turn. And you start on this process of learning about yourself, about learning about your environment, the experiences that you're having. Now, going to a therapist, one of the important aspects of that is, number one, you can be vulnerable and you can talk about things in a very open and honest way. And the thing about being with a therapist is they're not there to judge you. They are there to listen and to try to give you guidance. Hopefully that resonates with you. And I can tell you, and let me detour here, is not every therapist is going to meet your need. You're there, you get a sort of a handshake where you find out about the therapist, what their specialty is, whether it's grief, whether it's alcohol, whether it's child abuse, relationship dynamics, whatever it is, and begin to delve into it and see how you feel. Now, therapy in and of itself is going to be a little difficult for people that have never experienced it. But the idea is you need to get started somewhere so we can change your behavior, so you can have a better life. But it's about choosing your therapist. And you try to develop a rapport. Look, if you don't develop a good rapport with a therapist, it's not going to work for you. I mean, not every therapist is going to be somebody that you're going to work with. And hopefully you don't stick with somebody that's difficult for you, because that's going to turn you off to the whole process. And remember that this is about you learning so that you can get ahead in life. That's what this is about. This isn't about you sticking it out like this is grunt work. This isn't about being on the track and learning to do wind sprints and building your endurance for something like this. We're trying to get you into a place where you understand that you can be vulnerable, that you can talk about problems in an open and honest way, get some insight, and expect that. You're supposed to get insight to this. And, at some point, you may be looking at a therapist. It's their job to point out where they think you're going the wrong direction. Because if everything worked, you wouldn't be in a therapist's office, because you're there to learn about yourself and how you contribute to the problem, because you obviously do. And that's not a criticism, but you have to learn how you contribute to the problem before you can fix it. And that's what is going to take some time. If you have been dealing with a problem for a long time, it is not going to get fixed right away. And the thing about therapy is there are many people that go, and there are many people that will tell you about their experience. And what often happens to someone when they're in these moments, these make or break moments of their life, is they get into therapy because they're in crisis. Now, you go to a couple of sessions or a few sessions, then you feel like you're over the crisis. Well, I'm not of the belief that you're really capable of solving the problem in just a few short sessions. Sessions could last anywhere from 35, 45 minutes to an hour or an hour and a half, depending upon how the therapist sets it up. But the idea is this is not a short-term process. It's usually you're going to have to invest some time in it, and it may cost you money. There are ways around some of the cost aspects of it. There are mental health professionals that work pro bono. That means they do it for free. There are those that are associated with colleges and universities. Some people are trying to earn their degree, and they may have something tied in with a college that has a psychological studies program. You could call them, ask them if they have somebody that in the psychology department that is studying to be a licensed clinical social worker or a marriage and family counselor, that sort of thing, MFCC, marriage, family, child counselor. And maybe that's the way to get around the cost of this, because in some cases, therapy is expensive, or it may be something that you can do through your health plan. They obviously have amended things to show that therapy is mental health, is the stigma that used to be there regarding mental health. Hopefully, we're still working to break that down, because what we're trying to help people understand is that it's these roadblocks, it's these stigmas that we attach to things, these negative stigmas that we attach to things that makes us not want to do them. And then we fear them, we're afraid, and we're not going into therapy for somebody to be afraid, because you got to get these things out in the open. And this helps. Now, when you do this, expect that it's going to be difficult. And one of the things that I would emphasize, that when you go through the process, something to understand is that the conversation between you and your therapist is very personal. It's not something I suggest that you then turn around and go out in the streets and you start having side conversations with your friends about this, because this is a work in progress, as it is with any human being that's going through change. You work up to something, you probably hit a roadblock, and it's going to bounce you back a little bit, and you need to work on what it is that was the problem so that you can continue to go forward. And again, sometimes it's going to feel like 2 steps forward, maybe 3 steps back, hopefully just 1, but you're going to take a little bit of a fallback, and then you're going to have to get up and you're going to try it again. But that's the nature of change. I mean, anything that's worth doing requires the effort. And when you experience a breakthrough, and by a breakthrough, I mean that you have that aha moment when you're really learning something and you're going to apply it to your life, that's a victory. You need to learn how to celebrate the small victories in life, because it is there where you make the changes that can help you in the long run. And I'm of the belief that the sooner you start something like this, the more opportunity you have to apply it. And learning about this is what it's all about. Now, as you go through the process, what you can expect to have happen is, if you have, say, for example, you have been operating in this dysfunctional way, and you have people that you have been operating in this dysfunctional way with, when you begin to change, they are going to change also. They may like what you're doing, or they may not like what you're doing. But in effect, if it's people who are toxic, they may have a big problem with the fact that you're changing, and they may not be individuals you can continue to be your new self around. So here's an illustration. If you're a person who has an alcohol problem and you're getting help for that alcohol problem, it is not going to be helpful that you continue to exist in that alcohol-inducing environment. That is going to shortchange your process. And people who operate in your alcohol environment, let's say they're making them part of your past, they may not like the new you, because you're not partaking in the same kinds of activities. They may feel a disconnect, because maybe they think, okay, you're not drinking with us now, so are you judging us? See, that's their reaction to the new you. And you may feel isolated for that reason. Like I say, it just may be that you are just going to have to separate yourself from that life in order to change. But remember, you're changing for the benefit of yourself. And I mean benefit. And I don't mean in some underhanded way, but learning, living, and growing is a lifelong process. And albeit you go through these things, you learn from these things, and you get better. And as you improve with who you are, again, celebrate your victories and embrace those around you who have supported you in your change, because you are not always going to be the easiest person to deal with. Because as you have these emotional breakthroughs and these highs and lows with the process, the emotions that you're going to go through are going to be wide ranging. I encourage people who are in this process to they themselves journal your process so you can see how far you have come. It is a valuable tool in knowing where you were, where you are, and where you have the possibility of going to. Because if you track yourself over the years, when you think about where you were that got you to that low point where you needed help, if you had chronicled your slide, and when you look back on it, you say, oh, wow, there I was. I could see that I was going downhill and I just couldn't stop it. Well, now we want to chronicle your ascent, and it gives you some benchmarks, and you can relate to what it feels like when somebody else talks about the breakthroughs that they've had, that they've been able to accomplish in life through this process. And again, I'm talking about therapy here. I'm talking about going through the changes and why it's beneficial. In however it works for you, it's important that you remember what's happening. Everyone else may not be in your experience, but it's for the benefit of you. And when you come through this and you look back on what you've endured, I think you're going to be pleased with the outcome. It may not always have been a good journey, and there may be many people who will fall by the wayside because you will find that they no longer fit in your life. But that is okay, because when it comes to toxic people, they were draining you anyway, whether it's love, whether it's money or other resources, whether they were staying in your house and stealing from you, all of that. You can divorce yourself from those kinds of things and live a better life. It's also an opportunity to reconnect with your spiritual self. When you think about what happens to a lot of people is they sometimes do a backslide because they lose that connection to themselves. And some people would call that a spiritual connection, but they lose that connection and then they have to reestablish that, whether it's some sort of meditative practice, whether it's going to a house of worship, taking time out for yourself and learning to be present in life on a daily basis. That's the gift. I mean, you're here. Why not embrace that? Why not enjoy that with which you have been given? And far be it, I would hope that you would get this knowledge and this information before it's something of an illness. Many of who have practiced therapy have shared that oftentimes people come to them at a point in time in their life, not only when they're low, but that they're suffering from a debilitating illness. Sometimes it could be their life may be on the verge of ending. And a lot of these worries and a lot of these things that they've carried with them for years and years are caused by the stress of not having solved the problem. So think about that. If you suffer from some sort of chronic illness, there may be a component to how you've operated your life, and that if getting therapy may be a way for you to alleviate these stresses. And if you're afraid, we all have been there. We've all been afraid of something. But I hope that you reach out and get yourself some help. There's various ways you can do that. You can go on the internet. Some people, they still use phone books if they're listed in there. You can do a Google search of therapists, and whether it's drugs, alcohol, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's family relationships, whether it's bullying from kids. And there is an avenue there for the young people who are listening to this podcast. School counselors are an excellent resource to deal with those kinds of things. They're trained. They have textbooks, they have knowledge, they have connections, and we are trying to make it more of an understanding about those situations so that you don't have to be afraid. And they operate in confidence. And you could even say that, look, I need to keep this private. Say those words, get that out there, take charge of this, be cause in the matter. And you will find that then the outcome for this, for you will have a better life. And that's what I want for you. Again, I'm John Johnson, and we're talking about relationships. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm going to take a break. We'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we're back. Again, I'm John Johnson, and I'm hosting a program called Relationships. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And in the last segment, I was talking about therapy, getting a therapist, whether it works for you, and some tips on what to expect when you're going through therapy. In this segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about those of you that have kids. Do your kids have disturbing habits? Now, we oftentimes see things that our kids are doing and wonder, where did they get that? You got to look in the mirror, parents. Look in the mirror. Kids do things that they're allowed to do. Obviously, there are other outside influences that happen. They meet other kids and they get influences. They see things on television. Video games are a large source of influence. And I find kids are very, very, very impressionable. They're taking in information from the time they're babies. And their first few years of existence really sets in place a lot of their learning, a lot of the dynamics of their learning. So it's important for you as a parent to monitor that. You know, bringing kids into the life, that's a lifelong project. But when you think about some of the things that your children do, whether it's taunting, and some kids just learn that because, you know, they think it's joking, they think it's funny, but oftentimes these kids are actually mirroring the parents that are raising them. I mean, you can't just blame that all on outside influence. I mean, if you're a parent that has sort of a sarcastic bent, sort of a sarcastic way of talking to people, and when you're an adult, you understand that from an adult perspective because you've lived, you have humor, there's subtleties and things, but see, kids don't understand that because they haven't lived long enough to be able to practice and comprehend those nuances. But you see, they still imitate them without necessarily understanding what they're imitating. And if you as a parent see this kind of thing going on, you may really find yourself a little aghast at what you're witnessing. But look at how you treat them. Look at the model that you're setting up for them. And if you can do that self-examination, like I said, your kids are going to mirror that behavior that they see. One of the things that is important when you're raising children is to teach them that there is a place and time for things. When you want to talk about things, there's a way in which we can have a conversation that's respectful of both people, yourself, myself, and you have to model that for them. And then you can hold them accountable for that. Some kids are really in the drama. Of course, every kid has their personality, and we're respecting that. But there's also a way that they can have their personality, but you can still have them be in a conversation about their feelings and about what the expectations are, either to have things happen or about what they want, and be realistic. Because it's quite often that we expect our kids to understand things different than what we want for ourselves. There are adult things, and then there are children things, and that's obviously we understand that. But when I'm talking about, for example, let's say sharing, if you have a soda and there's one 12-ounce can there, and there's yourself, and there's your kid that wants some. Are you going to drink the whole thing by yourself and then expect that the next time there's a can of soda, you want your child to split that with someone else? Well, you haven't modeled that. What you've modeled is that it's all for you. And that's where kids understand that it's okay to take it all for themselves and not have to share. But those kids that model sharing, or at least give that example of sharing, they've seen it somewhere and they've seen that there's a benefit to doing that. And you have to show them that there's a benefit to doing that. That it's not all about taking for themselves. It's almost like having a team concept. Sports for children are good for this. Hopefully they have a great coach that explains the concept, but explains the team mentality so that they learn that we start together, we finish together, and we win and lose as a team. That's what that's about. But and it starts in the home. You give kids that experience of that something like that works, and then they will go out in the world and be that. They will be an example. Your kids put the face on your family name out there in public because the public sees them. And I can tell you as a parent, there's nothing more rewarding than somebody coming back to you and say, hey, your child is great. They have a great attitude. They're lovely people to be around, because we've all seen examples about what it looks like when it goes wrong. How many times have we been in a grocery store and we've seen the kid that just falls out and has a tantrum because he can't get what he wants? Well, you can imagine what's going on at home is that kid is doing that same kind of behavior at home, and they're wearing the people down and they get what they want. So the kid doesn't care that he's out in the public doing this. What he's experiencing, he's with mom and dad. I do this long enough and I'm going to be rewarded somehow. You know, in all fairness, there are times when parents recognize that they're wrong and that they need to be attentive to the kids' needs. But it's not about not being attentive, but it's about what kind of behavior we're going to reward. If you're going to reward the tantrum, then that's what you're going to get. You're going to get more tantrum. But when you reward the behavior of being responsible, asking in a respectful way, then you're going to get that in return, and that's how the kid is going to grow up. And here's another interesting example about what happens following this. Kids will be attracted to the same kinds of people that model that behavior. So, yeah, you have the kid that loves to be loud and he seems flamboyant and charismatic and so on and so forth. Sometimes they're just over the top because they're attention junkies. But ultimately, what your kids will notice is that that's a little too brash, a little too loud. I don't want that. I don't want to be associated with that. And they do something that's more toned down, and they understand respect and courtesy, and they use the words, and you teach them. And believe me, if you're a parent that pops off with a lot of profanities and things, your kid's probably going to do it because they're going to see that that's the role model. But if you tamp down on that and say, that's not how we do it, then you can hold them accountable for that. And it's okay. And it's good. And then reward them for the good behavior. I mean, it's one thing to get into their face, but then when they do it right, reward them for that. Because that's what you're trying to have happen for them. And then they have a better life. When you do those kinds of things, they respect people for being respectful to them. And then they can also expect to be held accountable for that. So as we live in the world, as we circulate, as we go around, then we have a different sort of expectation in terms of what's okay and what's not okay. People that aren't going to talk to us in a respectful way, they get the cold shoulder. And in general, as a society, it's a village. When we as a group decide what's okay and what's not okay, those who are outsiders show themselves up fairly quickly. So if you're disrespectful, you get no service here. It's like no shoes, no shirt, no service. Remember, we're talking about our kids. So in the interest of doing this for them and in the interest of having your kids be the kinds of people you want them to grow up to be, look at them. Pay attention to their behavior. Realize that you as a parent are the role model. You set the standard. Set the high standard. Have expectations of your kids. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I hope you are having a great relationship.